Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome, everybody, to Nightlight. So glad you could share your time with us today. I know time is precious to all of us, and when you share it with us, you really do us a great honor. If you are listening to the show in archive on YouTube, please make sure that you give us a subscription so we know that you're listening. By subscribing to Nightlight, you don't obligate yourself to anything other than many hours of entertaining and enlightening information. Doesn't cost you anything, but it does let us know you're listening. Want to also thank Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. As always, I endorse his tradition and his history and his method of preserving history. He and his wife are both native storytellers. You can find them on the internet. Just either Google native storytellers or Ken Quiethawk. You'll find their material and their CDs and their history, and it's amazing. So please do check it out. We have to hold on to our history because it becomes the foundation for which we build our future. I am really excited today that I have an amazing guest. I have Jacquelyn Lane with me, and she has written a book called DEVA-our Relationship with the Subtle World. And it sounds like it might be a light reading book, but I have to tell you, it is a profound book. It's amazing. It takes you into new depths of understanding of devas, and it isn't just little fairies flitting through your garden. It's almost an amazing perception of creation itself, and I highly, highly recommend it. Jacquelyn is a much-traveled New Zealand artist, author, and educator. She has a degree in the social sciences and has been involved in a wide range of metaphysical studies for nearly 50 years. She's the author and illustrator of an echo novel, The Children of Gaia, illustrator of Once in a Blue Moon, and scribe of This World of Echoes, A Divine Guide to Being Human. And, of course, her latest book, Deva, is published, by Findhorn Press, and it was just released in June. And it is, again, an amazing read. It takes you into a greater understanding of creation and humanity and the spirits and the energetics that are all around us all the time. I would say that a lot of you have used the term but not really understood exactly how deeply it means and it affects us. So I'm so glad she's with us today to share her wisdom and her knowledge and to enlighten all of us yet again in another way. Welcome to the show, Jacquelyn.
Thank you, Barbara, and thank you for the opportunity and the privilege of speaking with you and your many listeners. It's really great. Thank you so much, and it's wonderful that we can be on opposite sides of the world and still communicate at the same time. It's great.
Literally, you're in tomorrow already, so we know the world doesn't end today.
I am. Yes, I'm 19 hours ahead of you. New Zealand is the first country in the world where the sun comes up.
Oh, how amazing. That is so cool. So it's you know, I know where it is, but realizing just how far we are apart, it amazes me that we figured out the time change, for one thing. But it from all you've said and from what I've garnered, just slightly as to history and the topography of New Zealand, it sounds like a beautiful, magical place.
Yes, it is. It is very, and that's why tourism has become probably our biggest earner. Of course, at the moment, we don't have tourists because our borders are closed, but let's hope that we can get over that situation in the very near future.
I'm sure you can. So you've been in the metaphysical field for half a century, and
just pretty much. Mm.
Yeah, and so my curiosity is kind of piqued. What led you in the direction of understanding the Devas and working with them?
Well, it's actually, that's a really interesting story, and it's not in the book particularly. So as a child, I was always looking for them in the grass. My parents lived next door to a playing field, and that was, that was a pleasure on its own. So I used to lie in the grass before it was cut, and it was a great way to just feel the earth. And the city where I lived was had a lot of. It was the capital city of New Zealand, Wellington, and there were a lot of green, what we call green belts. So there were lots of green spaces, and we lived right next to one of those. So, and then when I was 5, my parents moved to Western Samoa with my brother and me, and there I got to experience what it was like in a sort of more jungle, tropical kind of atmosphere, and had plenty of opportunity to, increase my awareness of nature. And as far as the nature spirits and that whole kingdom is concerned, there were several seeds, I suppose. In the 1970s, late 70s, I came across a book. I saw it in a bookshop window about 200 miles from where we lived, because we were visiting my in-laws. And it was called The Magic of Findhorn. And its cover, it's a famous book in that field now, but its cover had these beautiful paintings of some toadstools. And I thought, when I bought it, I thought I was buying fiction. And as I got into this book, I thought, oh my goodness, this is actually a real story. It's not fiction. It's actually what's happened. So that introduced me to the Findhorn community. And it intrigued me. The whole thing intrigued me, that this woman called, my brain's gone numb, the lady at Findhorn, who just died recently, she had communication with that whole kingdom of nature spirits, etc. And so what happened next? Well, that sort of sat there in the background, and I started buying some of the Findhorn Press books, because they've produced a lot of books over the years. So I began to learn a lot more about it, but it was more just kind of like, oh, this is intriguing. It didn't really occur to me that I could really make contact with them myself in the way that they had over there. So the next thing that happened was that in the beginning of my art journey, I was beginning to be accepted into galleries, and my work was being shown at the New Zealand Academy of Fine Arts. And I thought, well, look, it's time I figured out how I'm going to sort of promote it. And I took myself off to Auckland with a portfolio. Auckland's our biggest city. It's about 400 miles from where we were living at the time. And I went up there and I did the round of galleries, etc. And one of the galleries said that they would like to give me an exhibition opportunity in about sort of 6 or 7 months' time. And would I go home and please give them a list of the paintings I thought I would do, etc. So I came home, and at the same time I was thinking, well, maybe I'd like to put my art into cards and things like that. And one person I'd met up in Auckland who was a publisher said that he wanted me to do a fantasy art book of a journey around New Zealand. And that kind of didn't really resonate with me. So I came home and I did what the gallery wanted, and I set a program for them and I sent it back, and then nothing happened. I didn't hear from them. And looking back, I think, well, why didn't I just ring them up? But I didn't. I just waited and didn't hear from them. And it sort of energetically, everything kind of went quiet. So I went to see a friend of mine who was a professional tarot reader, and her name was Karen, and spelled the Scottish way, Carron. And she did a session with me. And at one point I was burbling on to her about maybe doing cards and prints and things like that. And her eyes glazed over and she just literally went into a trance. And I sat there wondering what was happening. And when she came out of it, she was shaking her head and she said, there was a really loud voice, and had been a really loud voice in her head saying, tell Jacquelyn it's not cards, it's a book. So I thought, and I thought about this idea that this publisher in Auckland had told me about. I thought, but that doesn't feel right. So for a couple of weeks, it sort of just sat there and I didn't know what it really meant. And then I got a phone call from an elderly man that I'd done a few art workshops with, and he had been a marine biologist. And he rang me and asked if I would come and look at some paints that he had for sale. So off I went and to visit him, and we sat down. I looked through his latest paintings and admired a new gallery he had set up in his garage. And then this thing kept pressing on my mind, this message of Karen. So I'm sitting in the chair and I'm talking with him, and I thought, my thoughts are going on, and I'm thinking, I can't ask him about what a tarot reader said. He's a scientist. And then I remembered that he'd mentioned in the workshop that he believed in spirit guides. So I sort of thought, okay, I'm going to go for it. So I told him the story and what Karen had said to me. And he didn't laugh and he didn't ridicule, but he was obviously thinking. And then he said to me, he said, I think we're going, and bear in mind that by this time we're in the early 80s, early 1980s. And he said, I think that we will solve the nuclear issue, but we have a lot of problems looming on the ecology front. Why don't you do something to do with the Deva kingdom and ecology, right? And it was like my crown chakra just absolutely stretched open, and it was filled with light. I couldn't see a thing because of the light. I have no idea how I drove home that day, because for 3 days I couldn't see anything except this light, and in the light were these figures, and they were like tumbling down through the light into my head, and they were figures of elves, but not as we represent them. They were more shapes and energy forms. And that's how it started. So they came to me rather than the other way around. But the interesting thing about that is that I think that it demonstrates how when we are prepared to listen to the seeds that are sown, and when we sow seeds ourselves, that if we are true to that path, then sooner or later the path is revealed to us. And there's a sense in which I know the wise say that, well, we are the path ourselves. The path is not separate from us. We are the path. So that's how that started.
It makes such great sense, and I think I did not realize that the term Deva, what that means, which I think is fascinating as well.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that for a minute because it's really important.
Yeah.
So, one of the main reasons that, or perhaps the main reason I wrote this book, is that it seemed to me that there was a lot of disconnect between different areas of this whole subject matter. So, you know, people talk about nature spirits and fairies and the kinds of things that we're used to referring to in that sort of folklore tradition. But it was kind of disconnected from everything else. And one of the things that's always appealed to me and intrigued me, even when I was at university, was this idea of synthesis. So that when I studied my degree, you know, I was studying education, anthropology, philosophy, sociology, religious studies. And to me, all I was doing was just putting on a different pair of glasses to look at the same subject. So, and that is the way I sort of like to look at the subjects that I'm writing about or studying. There's so many different ways of looking at things, and unfortunately, what we've tended to do, particularly through the Piscean era, which was an era where happened to coincide with what the ageless wisdom teachings call the sixth ray, it meant that things got sort of divided into different sects and religions, and everything got split into separate pieces. And now that we're moving into the Aquarian age, we actually have to start bringing things together again. And I think that, you know, that in the past, if we go back to that pre-Piscean age, I think there was probably a lot more coherence in the way people felt and about the world. That, I mean, I might be dreaming there, but that's my sense. So now, what happened in the early part of the 20th century is that we had people coming into the West from the Eastern traditions. So you had people like Helen Blavatsky, the Russian, and she brought in a huge book, which I've never read, to be honest, but apparently it's extremely esoteric, and it's called The Secret Doctrine. So she brought in teachings from the East, and then she was followed by a woman called Helena Roerich, who brought in the Agni Yoga books, and then the third woman, and it's interesting that these came from women, right? And then the third woman was Alice Bailey, and so the Theosophical Society came out of Helen Blavatsky's teaching. And so you got these three women who were all creating, if you like, this new view of the world for the West. And then, of course, we got the gurus coming in from India and so on and so forth. But in that tradition of Blavatsky and Roerich and Alice Bailey, we got to see that the Eastern teachings talk about this thing called Deva, which literally means being of light. And so it covers the whole nature, spirit, fairy thing, but it goes on up to what's called the angelic kingdom. So it's quite interesting because when we talk about Deva, we are not just talking about nature, spirits, and fairies. We're talking about their overlighting intelligence that sort of, the closest word I can come up with at the moment is kind of supervises them, but it's not like that really. The higher Deva and the higher that we refer to as the angelic kingdom, they contain, if you like, they contain the lesser Deva, they contain the fairies and the nature spirits. And then, but the fairies and the nature spirits, they're actually about halfway up the hierarchy. Now, a lot of people get rather twitchy about that word hierarchy, but Deva is a hierarchy. And, you know, we've got this whole thing about equality, and people don't like the idea of hierarchy. But if we look at the world carefully, we realise that actually everything is a hierarchy, and from the atoms right or below the atoms, right to quantum particles, up to atoms, and then to molecules, and then to cells and organisms, and so on. That's the kind of hierarchy we're talking about. So below the nature spirits, there's also Deva. And why it's a good idea not to investigate those for us, because we have to then also look at another aspect of Deva, which is that at some point everything has come into manifestation. It's come down into density from spirit, right?
Uh-huh.
And then it gets to a certain point of like ground zero, if you like, and then it evolves. So it comes in from the top, it's from spirit and into density, down into matter, and then it starts evolving out of matter and back to spirit. But the point is, so why would that happen? Well, it happens because when it goes back up again, when it evolves back up, it's evolving with experience. So it's like God saying, I'm going to figure out what my potential is. You know, what can I experiment with? And so to experiment, spirit comes into matter, into the densest form it can, and then by evolving back towards spirit again, it's exploring all the possibilities that can come of that. Does that sort of make a little bit of sense to you?
It does, and I think what when I was reading it, I saw in my head a spiral, not so much a circle, but as you start at the very bottom and then you move and evolve upwards to, you know, gathering wisdom, gathering insight, gathering whatever, and then reaching an apex and then coming back down, taking all that wisdom and knowledge with you as you go back down. And once you are back into spirit again, you start to trip all over again. But you've collected wisdom and knowledge and all sorts of stuff on that trip, so that you start your next journey another level up. So you're constantly spiraling up with the wisdom and knowledge.
And then on the way we incur karma because we haven't quite got the hang of it. so we get we get held up
around. But it just I think what you've done with the hierarchy, I love the hierarchy. I'm fascinated with the hierarchy, and looking at it all and trying to, and I would read some, and then I would go out in the garden and I would sit there and I would say, now let's make sense of this, and I kept hearing laughter, as though, you know, you really think you're going to figure it all out now.
Oh yeah, they laugh at us a lot. And I've just remembered the name of the lady at Findhorn. Her name was Dorothy McLean. The lady at Findhorn who was the communicator with the DEVA kingdom. The Findhorn community, for those who are not familiar with it, is still going today. In fact, I had the privilege of meeting and spending time with Michael Lindfield, who was the head gardener at Findhorn, you know, in the early days, and he was the head gardener there for 14 years. And I got an email from him a few months ago telling me that Dorothy McLean, who had brought all this wonderful information through, she just passed away. She was over 100, I believe. So yeah, and you know, their contribution to this entire field is immeasurable, and so I, you know, highly recommend any of their publications. They're just wonderful. So,
absolutely, and the gardens there for anybody. I mean, they do work with all of these spirits, and what they produce is absolutely astoundingly magical. And please research it, Google it, research it, look into it, because, you know, magic happens in so many different wonderful ways and places that you should be aware of it when it is right there, smack in your face.
Yes.
I think one of the other fascinating things when you were describing devas of all levels, and I loved it that you literally took it down to a single cell and brought it forward from a single cell, and and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically, Deva is a level of consciousness, and so
well, yeah, I'm not, yeah, it's more conscious. It's more the intelligence that is infused into matter, right? So matter. We're using matter in a very broad sense here, right? We think of matter as solid matter, right? We think of it as solidity, and then liquid, and then gas. But beyond that, you've got etheric matter. And then you've got astral matter, which is where our emotions and desires come from. And then we've got mental matter, and above that there's the soul level, and beyond that there's Buddhic matter, and so on. And it's getting finer and finer and finer the higher up we go. So the ageless wisdom teaching is that one of the first things that the earth itself has incarnated as a being. The earth is a being, right? You know, we've got enough arrogance to think that, you know, it's just an object and we happen to be on it, okay? But the wisdom teachings are that the earth is a spiritual being, just many times bigger than we are. And far more complex. So ageless wisdom is saying that, you know, the earth has incarnated many times before, and in those earlier incarnations, that the purpose was to infuse the matter, all the matter of earth, in its all different levels, with intelligence. Because when you think about it, matter on its own, if it doesn't have intelligence, nothing can happen, right? So if you invent an atom, and the atom is just just a bit of something, and it doesn't have any intelligence to do or to be what it is, then it can't interact with something else that's also got intelligence, right? So everything has to have a degree of intelligence, even if it's so minute that we can't barely see it. Well, we can't. We can't see atoms yet, can we? Or we can't see particles. We can only infer that they're there from experiments that scientists do. So once matter is infused with intelligence, then the next possibility is actually to create things. So the intelligence within matter, or let's call it substance, because substance can include matter in the sense that we normally think of matter. But if we think of substance rather than matter, then we can also think of substance as being our feelings, our thoughts, our emotions, etc. So that's substance as well. And what we're doing as we evolve is learning to use different kinds of substance. So actually, the core thing is that our relationship with life is about how we are learning to use matter at all these different levels of density. Because you've got the most dense part is the solid physical part is liquid. The next dense part is gas. And then above that, we've got the etheric levels, which are lighter still, that contain the blueprints for the physical. And then above that, we've got the astral level I mentioned before. And that's where we have our dreams, we have our feelings, we have our desires. And so we're, as a kingdom, we're learning about that. So if we go back and look at our incarnational history, people talk about things like Lemuria and then Atlantis, etc. Well, if we think of those as epochs rather than as pieces of land, the wise talk about the Lemurian epoch. So that's the hundreds of thousands of years, or possibly millions of years, in which we were evolving to learn to use a physical body, to learn how to breathe it, how to actually work it until it became automatic to us. And the next stage, which was the Atlantean epoch, it doesn't matter what you call it, but that's what the books tend to call it, is the Atlantean epoch, was when we learned to use even more subtle matter, which is our astral matter, and learning how to have an emotional body. And that emotional body is also called a desire body. And we actually are still, the majority of human beings are still very much in that phase of the emotional body and the desire body. And that's partly why we've got so many problems in that direction, because we want stuff. We want it all the time. We're learning to use this emotional body, which is full of desire. But at the same time, we're also learning to develop a mental body. And, we're all at different stages of these levels of learning how to use matter. And in that matter, at every level, there's a different kind of deva, a different kind of devic quality of energy. So it's way more than just the fairies and so on of nature. It's also about the intelligence that we are using because of the substance we're using all the time to be human beings. And if it wasn't for the Deva kingdom as a whole, we wouldn't have any experience of being human. Right? So we've got ourselves, which is our being, our will, but we are using the Deva kingdom to experience that. Does that kind of make any sense?
It does. It actually does. We've heard of the Devas, and we've always relegated them to an area of nature but
yeah.
but they are so much more than just nature, because, well, of course we're a part of nature, but even objects like houses and airplanes have Devic energies that are working with them and for them. So
absolutely, and especially
you
find that, don't you, in old houses. I mean, America's got, much older houses or buildings than we do. It's quite funny. My husband was giving a talk to the Rotary Club in Egypt, where we lived in Egypt for quite a while, and he belonged to one of the Rotary clubs there, and he was giving them a talk, and he stated that somebody said, asked him, why were we so fascinated with the old buildings of Egypt, right? And he said, well, you've got to remember that in New Zealand, the oldest stone building is 150 years old. And there was sort of silence for a while, and somebody said, I think you've made a mistake. And he said, no, I haven't. Because New Zealand's a very young country and America is a relatively young country. So, we haven't had buildings, certainly not, and we don't have stone buildings here. Not a good idea if you've got lots of earthquakes anyway. But, I've found that as I've travelled and spent lots of time in the United Kingdom, you get these wonderful old buildings that are, centuries old, and they've got so much in the way of David intelligence and the imprint of the people that have lived there. As buildings absorb the energy that we're putting into them, and it's really fascinating. And what's her name? Marie Kondo, the Japanese tidying expert, she's got a lovely thing in her book about when she leaves her house, that she says goodbye to it, and when she comes home, she says hello to it, and she thanks it for what it's doing for her. And and of course the Japanese, they recognize the spirits of trees and plants and so on, which is why they're so reluctant to cut down their own forest, by the way. And so they, so that's part of their Shinto religion, is this recognition of the spirit in matter. So this is not a new thing. This has been going on for centuries and centuries in different ways. But I think what has happened to us in the West, as we've come into this sort of era of wanting, and this emotional body that is so desirous of things, we have unfortunately we've kind of dumped a lot of the older stuff. And in the Piscean era, of course, the churches, and this is the case with not just the Christian religions, but all religions. If you go to Mexico and you look at the temples there in Teotihuacan, just outside of Mexico City, you can actually go down underneath and see the original building there. And what they used to do was to build the new temple over top of the old one. So, and this happened in Europe as well, that when the pagans, they had their shrines, they were worshipping nature and so on. So and very much connected to the land. And when the Christian religion came along, it knew very well that the way to capture people's religious affiliation, if you like, was to build over those shrines. So when you look on an ordnance map of the United Kingdom, I'm told that the places like Stonehenge, which is sort of a hub of energy lines, and you spread out from there, you'll find that along these ley lines are series of churches, because the churches were built over top of these energy spots where the pagans worship their own, nature spirit gods, if you like. And so what we've done is that we've tried to obliterate the past to suit the new ideas, and that's also a modern thing, because if you look at the cathedrals of Europe, you will find the green man faces, and you'll find you will find evidence, pagan things actually incorporated into the cathedrals, but modern man's actually ignored those influences in the way we talk about religion. So I had an experience a couple of years ago where I was preparing for a workshop, happened to be in a church hall that I'd hired, and while I was setting up, the minister came in with the electrician to do some work there, and I was just chatting away, tend to be a bit of a chatterbug, and I happened to mention the word magic, and oh my goodness, the minister got really offended and sort of expressed to me that, magic was anti-religious. So I thought, oh dear. So I said to him, well, I think what God does is magical. And it's magical because we don't understand it. And that's what makes it magical. So he stopped protesting at that point and left somewhat quietly a little bit later, but he was obviously quite perturbed at my use of the word. And, I know what it was. I'd mentioned Harry Potter, and that's when he said that, it was offensive to him, the whole idea of magic. So, we get all these divisions, and all I'm trying to do here is to say, well, look, we can look at these things more synthetically, and I think that this is a really important part of what we will be learning through the Aquarian age, is to actually bring all these separated bits together so that we can understand things as a coherent whole and realize that what the American Indians are saying, what the Maori of New Zealand are saying, what the Inuit of the Northern Americas are saying, and what we are discovering too as Westerners, that it's all the same thing. It's just that we are talking about it differently, and we're not seeing the connections between all these different schools and ways of describing things.
Yeah, it is a pity, because it adds such great richness to your life to have that kind of an understanding and an insight into the energies that surround us. I know that in your book you were talking about, we look out at space and there's a void, and we think it's empty, but it's full. And
yes.
and it that drove a lot home to me, because of course, if you take us down to a molecular level or more, we aren't really a solid object. We're a collection of objects that have banded together for a similar purpose for a time frame. But space is that great expanse out there is full of similar objects that can at any point in time form together to create a more material form or a denser form, however you want to look at it.
That's right. It's the book describes it as its potential. The space contains the potential for manifestation. So we think it's empty, but it's actually not. It's what can manifest, but we just can't see it, because it looks to us as if it's empty, but it's not empty. Yeah, it's a difficult concept to describe and also to get your head around. It's the kind of concept that you really need to actually meditate on. A lot of the things I think that are in the book and that we need to understand need to be meditated on. But there's another book that I found really interesting on the subject of the sort of the non-emptiness of space, and that's Irvin Laszlo's Science in the Akashic Field. And it's published by Inner Traditions, who are actually now the publishers of Findhorn Press Book. And he describes the same kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, this is certainly not a unique thing that I'm saying. I'm just, adding to the discussion on that idea. And I found it fascinating. Yeah,
it is, and I think what also fascinated me was how everything that is of to us material form is not really, and it's when you get down to like that. When you get down to like the house you live in, I think one of the things that impressed me, because I'm getting ready to make a move and selling my house, and I've always talked to my house and thanked it for protecting me and sheltering me and seeing me through. I've always talked to my home, and lately I've been talking to it about the fact that I need to move, that I can't really care for it as I want to, that I will find the best people I can, and it's very interesting. And every time there was a showing, I talked to the house, and I've said, if this is the one you want, touch them and help them to find a way to get the house, and not looking for pick the rich ones because they can afford more or anything like that. It's just when you sense the magic, just let it happen. And it's funny because I've had a lot of people go through the house. A lot of people think it's a fabulous home, but nobody has snapped. And just last week, a couple came through, and I thought they were lovely, but then everybody has actually been lovely that's come through. And it's very interesting because I was speaking to their agent, and I said, I'm looking for people who are special and unique and magical. And he said, well, maybe these people are. And I said, maybe they are. We'll know soon enough, but I know that the house will welcome the right people. And they made an offer.
Yes.
And it was kind of like, it wasn't my choosing and saying, let this be the one, let this be the one, let this be the one. It was like, when my house welcomes them, I know it will happen. I know that it will occur. And so, it appears that it is. And I thank my garden and my home for making someone feel so at home that they want to be at home here. So
yeah, well, you've created something quite special there. It looks beautiful from the little bit that I've seen of it. It looks really lovely, and I'm sure they will benefit from that lovely energy that you've put into it all this time.
Well, it was amazing because I would talk to the garden and I would talk to my home and I would say, pick the right people and just make them welcome and we'll be fine. And it's been a year and a half, so I have definitely waited for them to find the right person. At least that's the way it feels right now. But I think I did have another question for you that plagued me slightly, and it plagued me to the point that I almost answered it, but I want to see what your answer is.
Okay.
Individual plants have their own deva, and then that particular species of plant or whatever has an overshadowing deva for that particular species, and I'm gonna narrow it down to a kind of tree. So there's a tree in my yard that has its own personal deva, and that deva has an overshadowing or an overlightening of all the trees that are of that particular species or genesis. And then there is another overshadowing of all trees. And what happens? Okay, so these are Davic energies that it's a hierarchy. So
Yes.
what happens when a species of plant or animal goes extinct?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Well, if we think of it as an idea, right, that a species is a design or an idea, okay, just like, because the higher Deva are called the architects of form, okay. So if you like, they're designing the species. So they haven't disappeared. They're still around somewhere. You know, they're still existent. But their manifestation, the actual physical tree, etc., or the tree, or the plant, whatever it is, has lost an opportunity to manifest. Now, what you've asked, I think, is a very interesting thing, and I need to research that a lot more because it hasn't occurred to me to kind of think about it. But in a way, what we've got is a world of ideas or a universe of ideas, and those ideas manifest when the physical setup, when the physical opportunity is available. And I think one of the things that we've learned with the coronavirus, you know, when Italy went into lockdown, for instance, we know that because the cruise ships weren't visiting Venice anymore, the waters, which have been polluted and devoid of fish and so on for a long time, they cleared up, and dolphins were being seen in the harbour, etc. So once the human activity stopped, nature was actually taking the opportunity to rebound. Now, when species die out altogether, it must depend on the circumstances, because we know that seeds can often last for thousands of years. You know, that there's the ability to just close off. I mean, could be one of the ways that they age things, and they can figure out when artifacts, how old they are, is from any bits of pollen and seeds and things that are attached or stuck inside them or something, right? So we know that the earth has powers of recuperation, but if we stretch the system too far, then it won't be able to support us, and it won't be able to support animals and plants, and it will basically have to, we just won't have the opportunity to be here. So, but the Deva themselves, those higher Deva that are the originators of that form, I think what we don't generally appreciate is that they are so high in consciousness, and they're under higher Deva still, right? So they're not disappearing. They're kind of getting absorbed back into their originating source. Just like we talk about soul groups, don't we? You know, we talk about us incarnating from particular soul groups.
Right.
And when our physical form dies, we haven't disappeared. Our essential being hasn't disappeared. We, retreat to our astral body, and then we retreat to our mental body, and then we retreat back to the soul body. But we haven't disappeared. Only our physical form has disappeared. And I imagine, as I said, I need to do some more work on it, but I suspect that the same kind of thing happens with the Deva Kingdom.
Well, that's when I was pondering it, it was kind of like, okay, I understand that if one is cut down, that its energies, its elementals or whatever, are absorbed and then redistributed. And my thought at the moment would be that if one goes extinct, it is absorbed back into the over-lightning Deva to be recreated and manifested into a new form or a new species that is more appropriate for that particular time frame.
Yes. And it's interesting because when I was researching the Children of Gaia, which you mentioned at the beginning of our talk, I researched that in 9 different countries, and one of them was Costa Rica, and to do the tropical stuff. And Costa Rica is very interesting because it has 3 different forest types. The Children of Gaia is about the forests of the world and what we've done to them, and the relationship between the forest and the nature and the Deva kingdom. So, and in Costa Rica, you've got dry forest, and you've got jungle, and you've got cloud forest, and the cloud forest has been particularly destroyed by human activity. So we can see all over the place how these systems have been diminished. But if we could just give them a rest for a while and find different ways of doing things so that we didn't have to destroy them, I think we would find that they'd come back. Now, in Costa Rica, you'll find oak trees. Now, oak trees is not something you would normally associate with a country like Costa Rica. But they came down, they migrated, the oak trees migrated between ice ages. So, they started off in the northern hemisphere because we normally associate them with cold places. And then between the ice ages, they moved down and got down as far as Costa Rica. So, so nature is very, very opportunistic. And but what we have to do is actually recognize its need to replenish itself. And unfortunately, there's so many of us now that it's very difficult to see how, unless we have more and more pandemics, God forbid, how this is going to happen. We're going to have to make some really, really hard decisions about how we all live if nature's going to recover. But it's a whole other subject. I have a brother who's an ecologist and a son who's an ecologist, so I get quite a bit of this from them. And my son, who's in his mid-40s, is unfortunately very pessimistic. And I think that that's a shame because he just realizes just how significant the changes are in our thinking and how much we have to come to grips with this desire body of ours, this emotional body that makes us want things all the time, how much we have to overcome that to be willing to give nature a chance to recover.
Oh, absolutely. But, I have great faith that that's going to happen. Because, to be honest with you, nature is far more powerful than humanity.
Oh, yes. I agree.
I mean, a couple of volcanoes and a couple of tsunamis and a couple of, nature could wipe us all out and then sit back and say, there, I'm going to give you a chance. Maybe you can come back, maybe you can't, but you're not coming back until you're primitive again, and then we'll try again. Yeah, no, all these idiots with all their weapons, it's, I think people don't understand the power of nature, and I go back to when we were on that huge square rigger. There is nothing more awesome. Well, there probably is, but to my mind in my life, there has never been anything as awesome as being on a huge ship with the squares open and feeling the wind begin to move you forward.
Yes.
I mean, the power of wind is just amazing. And, I mean, this was a concrete hulled ship. This was a huge ship.
Yes.
And it took us in its hands and it moved us forward with its breeze. Now, if nature can do that, I think nature is just kind of looking at us as though we are oh so young and oh so foolish and giving us a break and laughing at us a lot too. But I don't know why people are worried about aliens and things like that, because there is a power here on this planet that can wipe us out in a heartbeat without even blinking.
That's right.
And that's nature.
That's right. Yes. And I live in a country with, that's very young geologically, and we have a lot of earthquakes. And we've definitely seen that over the last few years, particularly in places like Christchurch. So, and it's quite interesting because, I was talking before about the sort of need to see things in a new light. One of the things that happened in Christchurch, in the big Christchurch earthquakes of about 10 years ago, was that the cathedral was destroyed, and most of the churches, because they were built of brick or stone, and they don't stand up. They don't stand up to powerful earthquakes. And there's been a big schism in the church, in the Anglican church down there, because the bishop wanted to build a totally new cathedral, but a very determined bunch of the parishioners wanted to rebuild the old one, which is going to cost an awful lot of money. And the designs for the new one were stunningly beautiful, but the people that want to keep the old form have won out. And I think it's such a shame that, that they're so attached to the old building that they won't embrace something new that would give a different energy. I just wondered also with this move from the Piscean age into the Aquarian age, if the destruction of Notre Dame was again another sort of indication that maybe we need new ways to celebrate those religions, new ways to manifest those kinds of buildings.
Well, I would tend to agree that I think it's time for changes on all levels. I know the people that I work with on a pretty regular basis are all going through, I call them Phoenix Rising energy crisis. They're going through a rebirth of themselves. Their energies are changing, and they're decluttering themselves energetically and letting go of what doesn't work and making room for what will work. And I think that is an energetic that is hitting countries and governments and of course the whole planet. So in a lot of ways, I've said that the planet is going through labor pains because there's a new rebirthing that's coming, and life as we know it will change for everyone, and this is a good thing.
It is,
but
absolutely. And we have to do it.
Well, yeah, but anybody, women, I guess, mostly, but anybody who has experienced labor pains know that it hurts. It's a painful experience, but speaking from experience here, but that ultimately there is great joy and celebration. So bring it on, you know. It seems to me that while change is definitely confusing, upsetting, and all sorts of things, it's also very powerful in that it gives you a greater opportunity to expand yourself into places where you hadn't gone before.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
So energetically speaking, I think I am so encouraged by everything that's happening, because it means, at least to my understanding of what's going on, it means that there is change in the air, there is a newness in the air, and is it going to be, you know, one of these beautiful magical times? Probably not, but ultimately it is going to be more magical. The one thing I did want to talk about a little bit too, because I don't want time to get away from me here. I mean, your book had enough in it to talk for hours and hours and hours and hours, but we don't have that many.
That's why it took so long to write.
How long did it take you?
Well, I started way back. So in the first decade of this century, I spent a lot of time in Scotland, and I used to stay on a friend's farm, or a husband's farm, and he was quite aware of the ley lines and things on the land, and but he couldn't communicate with the deva of the landscape. He was much more earthy bound. Anyway, we had a lot of discussion about topics of deva and so on and so forth, and he kept telling me that I should write a book on deva, because, you know, we did a lot of that kind of work together, communicating with nature and so on.
Uh-huh.
And so finally, in 2000,
is this the gentleman?
So in 2000, sorry?
Now, is this the gentleman that asked you to check out one of his fields?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Oh, tell that story too.
Yeah, well, okay, so I was staying, this was early 2000s, so I visited for sort of short-term visits, because Rick was working in Egypt, so I would visit him and then spend time in Scotland and then go back to Egypt, etc. And so what happened? We'll call him Joe. He didn't want his real name used. Anyway, Joe asked me if he had a deva in his field. He grew grains for for the market. So I went up to the field, and yes, there was a deva there, but it was almost, you describe it as depressed, and it wasn't swirling around or moving. Deva tend, they move because they're circulating energy, right? The ones of the level of nature spirits, they tend to they're circulating energy. The ones inside plants, they're just dealing with the activity inside plants, because, you know, if you got down and had a look at the cells of what's under the microscope, what's going on inside the cells of plants, you would see that there's a lot of activity going on there. So there's deva activity everywhere. But anyhow, so these more overlighting deva of the crops, they're moving all the time. Anyway, this one wasn't particularly. It was almost kind of sunk down into the ground. Now, the crops were growing okay. I mean, they had fertilizer and all that, but the deva itself wasn't really doing very much. So I had a talk with it, and gave it lots of love and attention, and suggested to it that it tell me what it needed, and it said that it wanted less fertilizer. So I told Joe that it wanted less. It didn't say that it wanted none, but it said less. So he said, well, that's difficult because under the European Union rules, he actually had to give the land the amount of fertilizer and the type of fertilizer under the rules. Okay, this is a ridiculous thing we've got. So anyway, I'd given my message and off I went. And the next time I was back there, the next year or the harvest or whatever it was, Linda, my friend, and I were particularly busy, and Joe kept saying to me, go and check out the DEVA, but I didn't get round to it until my last day. I was only there for a week or so that time. So eventually I did, and it was swirling around the field beautifully, and it had been joined by another DEVA from another paddock. Although I might be mixing up the times there, that might have been later that it was joined by another one. But anyway, it was certainly swirling around in circles over the field of barley. And so when I went back and I told Joe, I said, well, it's looking really healthy and it's very happy and it's swirling around all over the place. And he said he was very proud of himself. He said that his yields were up and he'd used less fertilizer. So he was getting, because the yield of the crop was up, he was getting more money for the crop, but he actually had to spend less. And I don't know how he fudged the figures so he didn't get into trouble over not, using so much fertilizer. But yeah, so that's what happened there. So the DEVA actually said what it needed, what the crops needed, which was contrary to what the science said, and that the sense I took out of it was that the energy that the DEVA was distributing on the field, and this is what would have happened in Findhorn, because they didn't use fertilizers in the synthetic sense. They just used good old compost, but they also used a great deal of communication with the DEVA kingdom and got their instructions there through Dorothy McLean. She would ask, what does this crop require? What does this patch of trees require, etc., and followed through. They followed through on that. So that's why their vegetables were so wonderful. And anyway, so yeah, whether Joe actually sort of carried that through to other, he was kind of captured by the system, but it certainly proved to him that the DEVA could do a better job than the agri-business and the rules.
Wow.
So
now,
wouldn't it be nice if we were able to do that with our agriculture all over the place?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Speaking of that, the wind has DEVAs, yes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What are they called?
Well, the ones in the air are usually called sylphs, SLYPHS, sylphs. It's a hard word to say.
So lately, within the last day, just in the news, there was an amazing dust storm that came over Egypt, and it has swept to California on its way across the United States, dropping the dust and sand that it gathered. And it appears it's a very unusual dust storm for it to cross an ocean. and
wow.
to be yeah, I was sad when I heard it. I thought, oh my gosh, what was that sylph thinking?
Well, it'll be a much higher than the sylphs are like nature spirits, but there's much higher, David, than that, to do with the weather. In Egypt, that's called the Hamassin. It's the wind, and it's a seasonal wind, and it turns the air sort of a reddish brown color.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? It's quite fascinating. It'll be interesting to contemplate.
I just heard it a couple of hours ago that this wind had, was they called it a reddish brown sand cloud,
yeah.
and that it had crossed the ocean, and that it was going to be working its way across the country. And it's fascinating to think that sand from Egypt was going to be dropping on this country.
Yes,
I just
that's fascinating. Lots of ways we could interpret that, but I haven't finished answering your question. So Joe kept pushing me to write this book. So I started in 2006 and 2007. I wrote a lot, but it was coming out quite academic and quite involved because it's such a vast subject. And I thought, gosh, I'm not saying this the right way. I'm not striking the right note here. So I put it aside. And but over the next 10 years, I thought about it quite frequently and tuned into, have I figured out how to do this yet? And finally, by the beginning of 2017, I thought, okay, I've got this. I think I know how to do this now. So 2017, 2018, I worked on it almost, that was the intense time. I totally rewrote it. And so by the end of 2018, I knew I had a manuscript that would work. So, yeah, it's been a very long process, as most of my books are.
Well, it certainly was a very worthwhile effort. Now, so what was there a deva that helped you do this? In other words, was there a devic energy that was helping you to manifest this book?
Yes, I think so. Everything that's got a very strong energy of its own has some kind of devic contribution there. I mean, that's what it is, isn't it? So, it's a combination of my will, if you like, and the deva response to my will. So, I think, books, I certainly find it with art that they take on, that they have a life and identity of their own. And books, and the stronger the energy that goes into it, the more easily identified that sort of, it's not every energy that goes into books is positive, of course, but but it is. There is. I always think of it as that the book has a deva. Yeah.
Well, that's where I was going. Was that first of all, I preach at every opportunity the necessity of having creativity in your life, and creativity to me is the channel through which inspiration and intuition work and or manifest. So that the more creative you are, the greater, more intense the energy that takes part in what you're doing. I've had times when I was writing something that just wasn't coming out right. And if you've ever seen the Magic 8-Ball, that thing you ask a question, turn it over, and a statement comes out on the bottom. Sometimes
no, I've not
when
seen
I'm
that.
Oh, it's a cute little game-like thing. You ask a question, and it'll either give you a yes or a no or not yet or
Right.
something like that. And so that there have been times when I've been writing that it didn't feel like I had the right energy, and it felt almost like I had, was doing something, and I was at a place where if I had a magic 8-ball, it would have said, "Not time yet. Try again later." And so I think when one is dealing with creative energy and intuition and inspiration, sometimes you try to make something happen before it's time, and it just doesn't have the right flow. So, and I call it being in the zone or plugged into the energetic field, or lots of different ways of explaining it. It's just that when you're in a certain place within your body and you've put your ego aside and you are allowing that flow of energy to come through you, so long as you're not controlling it, it flows beautifully. But when you start to manipulate it, it stops.
Yes. You're absolutely right. And I think that that's one of the challenges of being a creative person, whether it's art or writing or whatever it is, that you have to be tuned into you have to recognize, are you really tuned in or not? Because as you say, what comes out doesn't resonate, and that was what was happening to me early on. But I think also, when we are prepared to recognize that we are not in the zone, sometimes we have to wait for other experiences that contribute to being in the right zone.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, it's honoring that energy. And you've given it a name for me. I just have always called it energy, but now it is a deva of creativity, if you will, and it could be out to lunch when you're trying to do something, and if you wait till it comes back from lunch, it will merge with you, and then something amazing happens. It's sort of, did you ever see the movie Avatar?
Yes, it's one of my favorites, and they made that here, and they're making this because James Cameron actually lives here in New Zealand now, and they've just started it up again for the second one, it's being made here. So we have a very strong film industry here. So James Cameron moved here with his family some years ago. Because we have Weta Workshop here. That's the Peter Jackson's part of his production thing, and he did the Lord of the Rings. So James Cameron lives and works here.
In that movie, that there was always a connection between the rider and the horse, or the rider and the bird, and that's the way I envision working with devas, where you allow a connection to happen and then energy flows from it. It's a magical experience once you. To anyone that has ever experienced it, there's nothing. You have to call it magic because it is, because things flow from you that you didn't know were inside. And it is spectacular. But before we lose time here, and it's going way too fast, I want to talk a little bit about elementals, because everybody talks about elementals, but I'm not quite sure they know exactly what they're talking about, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, it's the whole thing about words and definitions, and you know, I think that we'll remain confused until we can have telepathy, because we're all trying to relay experiences, aren't we? And clumsily sort of come to some kind of agreement, but we still don't know whether we're seeing or experiencing what other people are. And one of the things that I think is important for people who, you know, the thing that you get asked so often on this subject is, you know, how can I see them? And Dorothy McLean, the lady from Findhorn that I mentioned earlier, and I've put this in the book, she was quite adamant that she'd never actually seen an elemental, and that it wasn't necessarily a good thing to see an elemental, because we, you know, we're on a path of evolution, and the elementals, if you like, below the level of the nature spirits, are still on the path of involution. They're still descending into matter, and we're ascending out of matter, right? We've done that involuting, and we are supposed to be working our way up back to spirit. So if we try to engage with elementals below the level of the nature spirits, then we are actually bringing ourselves, pushing ourselves backwards, and that is not a good thing to do, because what we've left behind becomes black magic, right?
Oh, okay.
Because there's a sense in which it does become black magic, because we've moved on, and we should not be dabbling down there anymore, because it will just take us on a downward trend again, right, back into density instead of up towards spirit. So now getting back to, so people want to see them. Now that's okay, but what you've got to realise is that it's an seeing nature spirits is actually an astral activity. It's an etheric and an astral activity. So it's not coming from very high up. It's that's where they seem to manifest for us. And that's okay. I have only seen them. I've only seen that level when I was working on the Children of Gaia, and when I finished that book, I don't think I've actually seen any since. But I sense them, but I don't see them. Okay, so it was as if the gift was, you can see them while you're working on this book, okay, because you need to get a sense of them so that you can convey them to the readers and, you know, represent them some way in art. And that was a problem for me because, you know, I knew that they were just energy, but if I tried to just represent energy in a storybook about them, people were not going to relate to them, because we relate to what looks something that we can identify with, okay? And that's why people always describe them as kind of like cute little human beings. But they're not actually like that. They're just energy. They're light. They're energy. Now they might, and it's our brain that wants to see them as something human looking. So once I finished that book, I didn't see them anymore, but I do sense them. And it's the sensing that's more important. And people, you know, want to know, how do I see them? How do I communicate with them? Well, it's all about waking your body up for a start, because it's a bit like Qigong, you know, the Chinese practice of Qigong. Qigong, the aim of it is to to be totally aware of the energy around you and the energy available to you. And dealing with or sensing nature spirits and DEVA generally is a bit like that, is a lot like that. So when you go for a walk, for example, it's like opening up the pores of your skin. You know, you open yourself up, as you will know, Barbara, from your work in your garden. You know, you open yourself up to the energy that's around you. You know, if need be, you know, talk to yourself about being connected to everything that's around you, because we are. It's just that we don't realize we are, right? So when you go for a walk, try and feel, you know, what's the land feel like underneath you? What does the air feel like? You know, what do those trees feel like? Just there's a number of ways in which people can kind of open up to sensing them. So, and I've found that when I've done workshops on DEVA, there was a lovely incident which I've recorded in the book, where we were coming. I'd sent people out to talk to trees and river and so on and so forth. And then when we got back together again and we're sitting on the bank, and when everybody had shared their experiences and we just finished the discussion, it was a still day. There was no wind, no rain, no wind, no nothing. But when we finished our discussion, there was a wind came and whirled around a little valley that we were sitting in, and everybody giggled and laughed because I had said to them earlier what I found happens for me, and particularly if I'm out with like-minded friends and we've been talking with the DEVAs or, you know, tuning into the landscape. When we've finished, there's usually a sign, and for me in Australia in particular, it was wind. And the wind, you know, this whirly wind would come around. And so when we were all sitting there and we'd finished our discussion and this wind came out of nowhere, again, it was like an acknowledgement. Okay, we're here, we've heard your discussion, and, you know, this is to show that we're here. So sometimes people get those things, right? But generally it's about, we have to build, doesn't matter what our spiritual journey is, but whatever it is, whatever it is, we have to build our, what I call our subtle structures of reception very slowly. Otherwise we can do damage to those subtle structures of reception. So you have to take those steps very slowly and not stress your brain, not put too much pressure on yourself, but little by little. It might take months, it might take years, it doesn't matter. And the experience of other people, unless you're born with, like Dora Van Gelder, into a family that, or my friend Karen, into a family who acknowledges the nature spirits, so you're growing up in an atmosphere where you haven't lost contact with that sense of spirit that most babies are born with, but they lose it because of socialization, etc. So if you're not born into that situation where you're growing up with that, Dora Van Gelder, for instance, she was 16 when she discovered that other people didn't see fairies and elves and nature spirits generally, and she was astonished. She thought that was part of life because she'd grown up with it. But sorry?
No, what I have found is it's fascinating in that it isn't so much a seeing of them it's a knowing they're there and being positive that they're there. And you can't explain it. It's just, I know they're there.
Absolutely.
And
that's a very good, accurate description. Yeah.
So it's hard to explain.
Not only, sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Well, it's a very accurate description. Not only do you know that they're there, you often know what they look like, and what they, you know what they feel like, and you know, and you have a sense. It depends how you work, really. I mean, I'm a very visual person. That's why I'm an artist, and I think you're quite visual as well. But you know, people should not get hung up on needing to see it. That not needing to see these things. Feeling it is more important than seeing it.
Oh, absolutely.
And
you did have something that fascinated me. You were with a group at one period in time, or maybe you were with just your friend, and you came across a row of stumps of trees that had been cut down. Yes, that was amazing. If you would share that with us, that was an amazing story.
Well, yeah. So I was out walking with an artist friend and my friend Linda, who shared so many of these adventures with me, and we were just walking back to the house, to my friend's house, and we came upon a row of stumps, and they were quite large stumps of what had been macrocarpa trees. Its other name is Monterey pine. They were imported into New Zealand in the 19th century. So they were quite large, and they'd obviously been there for a long time, and because they were silver. You know how wood can go silver when it's exposed to the sun, when it's been cut for a long time, just the way cedar does. And I was just, before I knew it, I left the other two, and I was halfway along this road. I was just drawn because there was this incredible energy that was pulling me, and I got about halfway along, and I realized that, where I was, and I turned back to my friends, and Carol just waved at me and said, just go on, do your thing. And I was aware that there was this great distress in these stumps, or in the ground underneath them, and the roots. And so I was, okay, what's going on here? So, and I realized that the elemental or the nature spirit of these trees, the major nature spirit of these trees, each one of them had got stuck in these stumps, and obviously there's been terrific trauma when they've been cut down. They probably hadn't had any warning, and somebody had come along with a chainsaw, or several people with chainsaws, and just chopped these trees down all at once. And they hadn't left. So I called in the deva of that species, the macrocarpa species, and it kind of sent down this column, like a tree trunk shape, this column. And then I called these nature spirits in my mind. I wasn't vocalizing, but in my mind I called upon these nature spirits to leave their stumps and to rejoin their if you like, what do you call it? The overlighting deva, to leave their root where they were in the roots and to return to their originating deva. And they did, and it was like I could see in my mind that they were sort of, it's hard to tell, whether you're seeing it in front of your eyes or whether you're seeing it in your head. But they were sort of like rays, from some kind of movie, sort of smoky white forms, and they came up out of the earth. They didn't come out through the stumps. They came up out of the roots and then up into this tree-like trunk thing that the Deva had sent down, and they were reabsorbed, and then it just disappeared, and that was it. And that whole horrible energy had gone, and they were happily reabsorbed. And that was a huge learning for me, and it was totally unexpected.
Well, I think what's fascinating actually is that, first of all, when you're talking Deva, when you're talking whether it's elemental or any of the hierarchy, you're talking an eternal spirit or energy.
Yes.
Or force.
Yes.
You're not talking. You can't kill them. You can disturb them. Let me ask you this: if they had remained stuck in the stumps, stumped by the stumps, eventually the tree would have gone back to source, and then would they have been released?
I guess so.
Because I had a huge oak tree that was on our property in a house that I lived in as a child, and it probably was well over 100 or 2 years old, and it did eventually pass away, and it was cut down and earth spread over it, and I planted something smaller in its place. And after about 15 or 20 years, the plant I had placed on it died, and nobody could tell me why, but it died. And I had a horticulturalist come and say it was a beautiful little maple. And he said to me, it's drying up. It doesn't have enough water. And I said, I'm flooding that thing. It can't be that. And it did eventually die. And when I had the man who mowed the lawn, I had him dig it up. And as he was digging it up, he suddenly disappeared. And I looked. He was a little man, but, well, not that little, but he sank into the earth, and there was this huge cavern underneath where the oak had been, and you could see where the branches tunneled out. It had finally all rotted away, so that there were these amazing maze of stuff underneath it. It took, my gosh, we had to fill it with rocks and stuff like that, and then put dirt on top of it. But it was so if those stumps had disintegrated back to source, would then the elements have been set free?
Yes, I believe so. Because you see, in your example, it was a natural death, right? Mm-hmm. And they would have just gone back. But in this case of the macrocarpentries, it wasn't. Now, so the lesson here is that, if we're cutting down a tree or a bush or trimming a bush or removing a plant like that, if you give it warning, it will go back to its overlighting Deva. And it's just a small thing that you can do, and there's other examples in the book of that. And then, then you're being kind, and you're stopping that distress. And the most Indigenous peoples had this thing where, if they were going to cut down a tree, they would tell the tree, and they'd do a small ceremony or ask permission to take the tree. That was quite normal. Certainly the Maori people of New Zealand used to do that. And it's interesting that they are very strongly represented amongst the forestry workers who are cutting down trees. So Whether they still do that or not, I don't know. But I think you'd find that it was normal amongst the American Indian tribes to actually ask permission before trees were cut down. And for that very reason, because they were aware of these entities, the spirit within the tree.
What a sad loss for all of us that concept has been removed from the general population.
Yes. We've become extremely brutal. Extremely brutal.
When you stop and think that all they do actually is share love, and that you know, and in return, we treat them as if they were corporal. We're made up of the same types of energy. So to not respect them doesn't make sense.
No, and I think this is one of the main points I wanted to make in the book, was the fact that because Deva is also known as the Deva his other name, it's the builders of form. So, you know, we are using Deva all the time. We're interconnected all the time. We just don't know it and we don't see it. And I think this is, you know, something very important that if we understood that idea of pan consciousness, which is that everything is one thing, and that everything that we do affects everything else, and the things that happen around us affect us, we'd be a lot more careful about what we did and a lot more circumspect about how we behaved and what we did. Yeah. But it requires a lot of attention.
So in a way, you were the Deva that created the book.
That's an interesting point. Yes, because ultimately we've come. Yeah, we've all come from one source, haven't we? No, that's what I believe anyway.
So I've always believed that the creation, that which is a creation of a greater creator,
yes,
its mission is to become a creator and pass it on.
Yes. And what we're doing is helping that one to explore its possibilities.
Yeah.
And
so
you know, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's if we look upon ourselves as being a part of the process and not just an observer, it adds greater responsibility to everything we say and do.
Absolutely. And I think we're running out of time to discuss it, but one part of the book that I've particularly learned from was the Devas of commerce, because it never occurred to me that there were Devas of commerce, and it totally blew me away that, oh, hang on a minute, all our financial transactions and what we call commerce, that had Deva as well, and we are actually misusing it because, as they said to me, it's got to be fair, and if we're not using the Devas of commerce fairly, we're misusing them, and we will come to grief that way.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
And I think basically it's important for everybody to realize that there is nothing that does not have a Deva connected to it.
Yes. That's right. That's right. And so the ultimate lesson I think that we, should be getting from this kind of material is that we are responsible for how we use matter at all levels of density.
Oh,
that's a big definition to get your head around, but and I think it's what people will need to read more than once, probably.
Oh, absolutely. I really, it's you kind of get into consciousness and you get into the different energies and the different focus and the different. I loved your charts, by the way; they were great.
Thank you.
But in putting yourself into this picture here, and you can't help but do it. You understand that we are such a small part of such a great organization. It's unbelievable. And we're a very small part of it, yet we are a necessary part of it because, without us, the puzzle is not complete. So
that's right.
So when people, say, I can't do anything and I can't do this, it's like, every person has a voice. Every person has the ability to send or not send love, and that love. It's like a magnet. We are drawn by the cosmic love that created us. And the more we utilize that energy and share that energy, the greater our reality becomes.
Yes, absolutely. And it's very easy to fall into depression and hopelessness and poor meanness and all those things, but it's something that the masters that have gone before us keep telling us, have said, you must always stay positive and, working towards the greater good. And we're in we're trying to work our way out of this sort of selfish, self-centered, human preoccupations that we have.
Yeah, and the other thing that you do speak to in the book, I mean, you and I are very fortunate in that we are saturated by nature, but there are those people that are not that fortunate, and yet you can find devas in concrete jungles, and you can find all sorts of ways to communicate with, everything that is energetic, everything that is material has devas with them. And, if you live in a concrete jungle, there are often botanical gardens that you can visit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There are places where you can go to expose yourself to these kinds of energies. And it's so highly recommended. It makes you healthier. It makes you more vibrantly alive, and you don't have to. And I think the one thing that's really important is it's not prayer. It's sharing love, and there's a big difference.
Yeah, and love is about connection.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but a lot of cities, they have great parks, and there's, I love Central Park in New York. It's a beautiful place, and it's surrounded by a concrete jungle. There are opportunities in most places for us to get our fix. But I would also say, just quickly too, that I do find that spending a lot of time on a computer, which unfortunately is part of my job these days, spending a lot of time on the computer does tend to challenge me in terms of my sensitivity. And I think without Qigong and without walks, lots of walks in nature, I would find it very difficult to retain that sensitivity that we need.
Well, and also, though, buy a potted plant because that plant's going to have a deva. And so it's really it's quite profound. The more you work with this kind of philosophy and energy, the healthier you become and the healthier everything around you becomes as well. I do want to let people know also that first of all, your book is called Deva, very easy, and it's called DEVA-our Relationship.
DEVA.
Right.
And we better tell them. Sorry, Barbara. We better tell them that that's DEVA, not DIVA. It's DEVA.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it can be found. It can be found everywhere. And also you can be reached, and your material can be looked at www.tallpixie.com, and your artwork is there, and the artwork is to die for, everybody. It's so inspired. It's so magical. It's really the coolest stuff you'll ever see. So do take a look at her website because it is just magnificent. It stopped me dead in my tracks, and all I could think of was,
Well, my husband is pushing me to put out a book of my art, just of my art. So, along with a whole lot of other books that I've got on the go.
Well, I think it's a great idea. I want to thank you so very much. We are just right at the edge here of out of time. So I want to thank you so much for being with me and for sharing your material and your energy and your magic with us, because your book and you are truly amazing, and I'm so honored that you decided to come on the show.
Oh, the honor's mine, Barbara, and I'm in awe of the terrific service that you've been doing all these years with your podcast and your other work. So, the feeling is mutual. And I want to thank you very much for this opportunity. It's just terrific. Thank you.
Well, you're so welcome, and we will certainly be talking to you soon again, I hope. And everybody, please check out her book. I found it on Amazon. It's a glorious book. It truly is. Also keep looking on YouTube and on Blog Talk. We have 2 more shows this week. One tomorrow and one on this is Thursday, and we have another show on Friday and then another show on Saturday. So check us out. And if you can't make those shows, do check us out on YouTube, and we would welcome your subscription on YouTube, because the numbers tell us that there are people out there listening. So good night, everybody. Have a great night. Stay well, stay happy, and talk to your plants. They need the company. Good night now.